In the Western world, insects are feared, hated, or at best tolerated. We strive to minimize our interactions with insects at all costs. In many other parts of the world, however, insects are viewed in a completely different light. They are not seen as a nuisance or as objects of disgust, but are sought out and valued as a source of food. To millions of people, insects are as delicious and as commonplace food as beef or chicken is in the United States. The practice of eating insects and other arthropods like spiders and scorpions is known as entomophagy. It is an accepted part of cultures in Asia, Africa, North, Central, and South America, and Australia. This makes sense considering the sheer volume of insects in the world. There are around 1 million known species of insects, 85% of all animal species. It is estimated that there are 10 quintillion insects living on Earth presently. That means that there are about 1.5 billion insects for every human being on the planet. It's easy to see why many people exploit this abundant source of protein. Raising insects for food is also much more efficient than raising traditional livestock. 10 pounds of feed yields only 1 pound of beef, but up to 6 pounds of insect meat. Insects also naturally live at high densities, so hundreds of insects can be kept humanely in 1 square foot of space, making it possible to raise them virtually anywhere, even in urban areas. As the world's human population continues to grow, there simply may not be enough land to raise the number of livestock required to meet the increasing demand for meat. Insects could be a sustainable alternative. The reluctance to eat insects seems a little odd, considering that other arthropods, such as lobster and shrimp, are eaten in the U.S. without a second thought. What makes insects different from seafood? Rachel Knight, an entomologist at the Museum of Life and Science in Durham, North Carolina, explains. What makes an insect different than something like a lobster or a shrimp or other crustacean?
They're just in different families. They're classified differently. Most crustaceans are going to be water-dwelling. Your insects are the flyers.
But they're pretty similar otherwise than where they live?
They do have a lot of similarities, yes, in terms of the appendages and the external skeleton.
So in your opinion, eating a cricket wouldn't be all that much different than eating a shrimp?
No.
Biologically?
No.
Despite the strong cultural taboo against entomophagy in the U.S., there is a small but growing movement to embrace it. Though the practice is not yet mainstream, it is slowly gaining popularity, especially among people concerned about food sustainability and those opposed to factory farming practices. One such person is Tiff Zhao, a student at Duke University who has experimented with entomophagy. She agreed to show me what's involved in keeping insects for food.
Okay, so this is where I keep them. It's a recycling bin, and most people just keep them in Rubbermaid containers or terrariums, depending on how many they're housing. There's roughly 500 in here, and they don't require much at all. Just some egg cartons for them to hide in, some food, and lots of people are they're very easygoing. They just throw in a few potatoes, but I like throwing in some oats, some high-quality dog food, the same kind I give my dog. Just whatever leftovers I have, like carrot ends, apple cores, cuts from vegetables that I'm not using. So it's very easy.
So why do you get them live, and why do you feed them this special diet when some people just eat potatoes?
I get them live because I also have a leopard gecko, so that's my more legitimate reason for having them. And also, you can't cook them, for my purposes, you can't cook them when they're dead because, like crabs and lobster, once they're dead, they spoil very quickly. Okay. And I feed them what I guess more varied and nutritious diet because with all foods, whatever you put into them gets put into you and gets put into my gecko later on. So I want to make them as nutritious as possible.
Great. So where did you get these crickets?
Not to like be advertising this group or anything, but I got them from a cricket factory called Warren's Cricket Farm. They're in North Carolina, so I guess you can say these are local. And the lady's really nice. They have their facility seems really great because they ship them out. They get here the next day, and they look really healthy. Like none of them are really missing any legs or missing any antenna, and no foul smells coming from the box. So I think that they take pretty good care of them.
Great. So this cricket farm, do they sell mostly for pet purposes?
Yes.
Yes.
Actually, they don't know that I'm cooking them for my purposes, but I'm planning on asking them what they think of that next time I order some.
So in your research, or just looking around when you've been getting into this, have you found anywhere that would sell crickets just for human consumption, or is it mostly for...
No, I'm sure anybody who eats crickets buys them from pet stores or places that sell them for pet purposes. But protein is protein as far as I'm concerned.
Great. So why would you have to buy crickets? Why couldn't you just, go out and find some bugs and cook them up?
Technically, you can, and I feel like in other parts of the world, a lot of people still forage for insects. But around here, you just don't know what chemicals they've been exposed to. And just they're in this suburban environment, you don't find the quantity of insects that you would need to sustain yourself. Not that I eat crickets regularly, I just want to say. It's just, but I am open to these ideas, and I do find that it's a very interesting and possibly sustainable source of protein.
Great. All right. So why were they in the freezer?
Because you need to cook them while they're alive, similar to what you do when you steam crab or lobster. And it just slows down their metabolism because crickets are really jumpy, as many people know. Get away, sorry, go. And it just stops them from hopping around when you put them in the oven or however you choose to cook them. But they're fully alive right now. If I left them out, they would just come back to life.
Sort of just hibernating right now.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Hi, their last hibernation.
Yes.
And this oven's already preheated to 200 degrees.
Okay. So how are you going to bake these crickets?
You just put them in there at 200 degrees for 20 minutes to 40 minutes or however long it takes for them to get crispy. You just kind of test it with your fingers, you crunch them up.
Are they seasoned with anything or just
plain? I mean, you can eat them just like that, but once they're done, you can put salt and pepper or any other seasoning you want on them.
Cool. And so do you always bake them, or have you tried different ways of preparing them in the past?
I've tried sauteing them with onion and garlic, and that turned out all right. I guess insects are definitely an acquired taste, I feel like. And I like them this way because when they're crunchy, they have a different kind of texture and flavor to them. Whereas when you saute them, they're kind of still soft-bodied. And that kind of cricket flavor is something I still haven't gotten used to yet. It wasn't horrible, but it's just, I prefer this method a lot more. And it's just easier to do it, in my opinion.
Great. Well, soon we'll have some crickets.
Yay.
So when and why did you decide to start eating insects?
I can't really pinpoint an exact date, maybe. I've always interacted with insects growing up, whether it's through breeding them to feed other animals that I've had, or just being fascinated by them in the wild. But I think I've always grown up with the knowledge that there were people out there who did them in other cultures and ate them in other cultures and stuff. So it was, I think when I had them, at some point I was just like, maybe I should try doing that too.
Great. So is there any big ticket reason why you do it? Environmental or sustainability concerns, anti-factory farming, health, novelty?
Maybe all of the above, actually. I definitely, for nutritional reasons, I feel like they are a more sustainable source of protein and other nutrients compared to beef or something like that. And I'm definitely against the whole factory farming thing going on right now. And also just, I feel like a big part of it is to just widen people's comfort zones, because I'm sure a lot of people are uncomfortable with this. And I know people are uncomfortable with this based on people I've talked to. But I like pushing people past their comfort zones, and I love seeing people just not be afraid of something they were normally afraid of. And it doesn't mean eating insect per se. It might be just holding an insect or just accepting the idea that they're important parts of the ecosystem as well.
Okay, well, kind of going off that idea, how have people reacted when you've told them that you've eaten insects before?
Well, my friends are not at all surprised. But most people at first are like, ew, why would you do that? But I feel like the more we talk about it, the more they become accepting of it, which doesn't mean they'll immediately be like, oh, I want to try one now, but it gets them thinking about the possibilities at least.
Great. And so, like you said, eating insects is part of many, many cultures around the world. Why do you think it never became popular in the U.S. or it still hasn't caught on? Is there a particular cultural block?
That's a very good question. I think there are many different reasons, and the reasons vary depending on the region. I think, like, as you know, in South Africa, there are certain tribes of people who depend on mopani worms just because they are so abundant that they eat all the leaves in the trees after an entire season. So it's just the most ready go-to source of protein. Whereas here, our culture is kind of based around like pigs, cattle, chicken, the typical meats that you imagine on your plate. And I feel like, especially today, people are just less accepting of knowing where their food comes from. Like, I know people who have never touched raw meat before. I know people who won't eat a cut of meat if there are bones in it because they're just, the idea is so foreign to them.
Right.
So there's definitely this, I wouldn't even say it's like a cultural thing anymore. I would just think it's like a gross factor that people have developed an intolerance to.
Alrighty, here goes nothing. They taste like sunflower seeds, kind of.
Yeah,
they're pretty
people
good.
have said that.
They kind of actually have like a sort of shrimpy aftertaste.
You know, the top answers that people give are seeds, like a nutty flavor, and shrimp.
I think maybe the outside tastes like a sunflower and the inside tastes like a shrimp. Cool.
Best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Maybe. Who knows? For now, it's definitely a novelty factor. Like, if you go to science museums, they'll often sell them covered in chocolate or sprinkled with cheese or something. And they're really expensive in those stores, too, because they're such a novel thing. And I think, for sure, crickets are something that anybody can raise in their house, just because you can kind of treat them like composting machines, sort of. But I also, to go back to the previous question you asked, I think there's also kind of like a socioeconomic stigma behind it, because the idea like, oh, you need to eat insects, maybe like you're so poor that you rely on insects, or you can't afford beef. Right, exactly, which might not be true at all, but there's definitely that factor to consider as well. I hope it becomes more mainstream.
Great.
So, I imagine that people, if they keep exploding population-wise the way they are, will be eating insects in the future.